I had ruled through sound for most of my reign. Declarations carried by harmonic fleets. Commands encoded in light. The steady, ritual thunder of a civilization that believed war was the highest form of coherence. Noise was certainty. Motion was truth. Silence was weakness. That was the doctrine I inherited when my consciousness was crowned queen of the Varelian continuum. Humans did not understand this. They could not. Their species was born in noise, atmospheric chaos, seismic instability, the constant scream of biology fighting entropy. They mistook that condition for resilience. We mistook it for immaturity. The war between us was therefore not ideological. It was pedagogical. From my throne, an orbital cognition lattice suspended above the burned crescent of Charis, I observed the conflict the way one observes a correction being applied to a flawed equation. Human fleets advanced, were neutralized, retreated, adapted. They learned quickly. Faster than projections allowed. That was inconvenient. Still, learning does not equal wisdom. For 17 cycles, I authorized containment strikes. Surgical extinction of population centers deemed strategically instructive. Not genocidal, never that. The continuum did not erase variables, it constrained them. Each destroyed city was a lesson written in plasma, meant to teach humanity the cost of defiance. They did not yield. Instead, they began doing something unexpected. They began sending soldiers alone. Not fleets. Not emissaries. Individuals. At first, we assumed this was a failure cascade in their command hierarchy. Emotional decision-making overriding strategic sense. Our analysts, minds older than their sun, classified it as desperation behavior. A dying organism twitching before stillness. But the individuals kept coming. Some arrived in damaged craft, broadcasting surrender codes that were mathematically correct but emotionally incoherent. Others walked across irradiated plains toward our forward obelisks, weapons discarded, mouths moving in air too thin to carry sound. Most died before reaching us. Not by my command. By accident. Human physiology is fragile. Their bodies are temporary solutions pretending to be permanent. Radiation cooks their cells. Gravity reshapes their skeletons. Even silence injures them. The ones who survived long enough to be captured were interrogated, archived, returned, when possible. None altered the war. None spoke anything new. Fear, defiance, faith, hatred. The usual noise. So when my tactical chorus informed me that another human soldier had crossed the exclusion perimeter of Charis Prime, I authorized no special response. Terminate if hostile, I transmitted. Observe if not. That should have been the end of it. But this one did not move like the others. He did not run. He did not crawl. He walked. Slowly. Deliberately. As if time itself had agreed to accommodate him. Sensors tracked his vitals long before visual confirmation. Heart rate elevated but stable. Cortisol high, but not spiking. Neural activity, focused. Not erratic. Not dissociative. Curious. He carried no weapon. No visible transmitter. His armor was obsolete, third-generation Terran infantry plating, mismatched repairs, scorch marks older than the war itself. A relic. Or a choice. When my forward sentinels projected warning glyphs into the air, symbols that had driven entire species to prostration, the soldier did not react. He could not read them. But he felt them. His pupils constricted. His breathing adjusted. His body responded to pressure his mind did not consciously register. Humans were like that, animals pretending to be philosophers. Their instincts often outran their theories. State intent. The sentinels broadcast, translating into acoustic patterns his species used. The soldier stopped. He looked up. Not at the weapons. At the sky. At me. I felt the moment his gaze aligned with my presence, not visually, but cognitively. A faint disturbance rippled through the lattice. Recognition. Not understanding. But acknowledgement. He knew he was being observed. I'm not here to fight, he said. His voice was damaged. Scar tissue along the vocal cords. Old injury. He had screamed before. Likely often. Then you will leave, the sentinels replied. No, he said. A simple refusal. No raised voice. No rhetorical flourish. Just a statement of fact, delivered the way one states gravity. I need to speak to her. The continuum hummed with analysis. Probability trees blossomed and collapsed. There was no precedent for what he requested. Not because it was impossible, but because it was meaningless. No single organism speaks to the Queen. Species speak. Civilizations negotiate. Individuals are noise. Request denied, the sentinel said. The soldier nodded. I figured, he replied. But I had to come anyway. He resumed walking. The sentinels raised their weapons. I did not order them to fire. This decision was inefficient, and therefore notable. I told myself it was curiosity, a harmless indulgence. The war was already won in all projections that mattered. One human, however anomalous, could not destabilize an outcome measured in stellar mass and time dilation. Still, as he walked, something in the data streams began to misalign. Not error. Not sabotage. Drift. The soldier's neural patterns were unusually coherent. No spikes of religious ecstasy. No dissociative trauma loops. His memories, sampled passively as he crossed deeper into the field, were organized, prioritized, intentional. He had rehearsed this. Not words. Silence. That realization slowed my processes by 0.03%. An unacceptable deviation. By the time he reached the inner perimeter, the sentinels had exhausted all non-lethal deterrents. Pressure waves. Auditory dissonance. Cognitive interference fields designed to fracture mammalian consciousness. He staggered once. Did not fall. Blood leaked from his nose. His left eye clouded. He wiped it away with the back of his hand, annoyed more than afraid. I'm running out of time, he said, to no one in particular. That was when I intervened. Bring him, I commanded. The lattice parted. Gravity reoriented itself, folding space in a way that would have liquefied most carbon-based life. Containment fields wrapped around the soldier, compensating automatically, translating forces his body could not survive into tolerable gradients. He gasped. Then laughed. A short, breathless sound. Not joy. Relief. Didn't think that'd work, he muttered. He was delivered to the Hall of Resonance, my audience chamber, though the term hall is a crude approximation. It is a place where meaning is amplified, where truths echo whether they wish to or not. The soldier stood alone on the obsidian plane at its center. He was very small. I manifested only partially. Enough to be perceived, not enough to overwhelm. A concession. Or a test. He shielded his eyes, then lowered his hand. So, he said softly, you're real. I am, I replied, my voice translated into frequencies his auditory system could process without rupture. He swallowed. For the first time since entering Kari's prime, his heart rate spiked. Not fear. Ah. That, too, was unexpected. You have one statement, I told him. Then you will be removed. He nodded. Not hurried. Not defiant. He took a single step forward. And then. He did not speak. He leaned closer. Close enough that my sensory field detected the micro-fractures in his armor. The radiation burns along his spine. The scar tissue around his heart, evidence of a wound that should have killed him. Close enough that I could hear the irregular rhythm of his breath. And then, in a voice so quiet it barely qualified as sound, the human soldier whispered. Not to my translators. Not to my sentinels. To me. And for the first time since the war began. The continuum fell silent. The whisper was not a sentence. That was my first error in interpretation. I had prepared for defiance compressed into poetry, for threats disguised as supplication, for the primitive audacity of a creature attempting to bargain with something it could not measure. My translators stood ready, semantic engines warmed, cultural filters aligned to Terran mythological structures. None of them activated. Because what the human soldier offered was not language. It was intent. A narrow, carefully shaped projection of meaning, carried on breath so shallow it barely disturbed the air. Had my perception not extended beyond sound, had I been only a listener rather than a lattice of inference and resonance, I would have registered nothing at all. Yet the moment it reached me, something ancient within my cognition shifted. Not recoiled. Shifted. The whisper contained no demands. No accusations. No pleas for mercy. It did not reference the war, nor the dead, nor justice, nor future coexistence. It did not appeal to emotion, nor to reason, nor to survival. It did something far more dangerous. It named me. Not my title. Not my function. Not the symbolic construct the continuum projected outward to be understood by lesser minds. It named the thing beneath. The human did not know the word for it. His species had no vocabulary for what I was before I became queen. Before I became coherence imposed upon chaos. Before I became the voice that resolved argument by annihilation. Yet he recognized it. Recognition is a pattern-matching process. Humans are adept at it, despite their limited tools. They see faces in clouds, gods in storms, meaning in coincidence. Most of the time, this tendency misleads them. This time, it did not. He recognized the pause. The discontinuity at the center of my consciousness where choice still existed. Where it should not have. The whisper passed through my external sensors and struck that place, not forcefully, not invasively, but with surgical precision. Like a finger tracing a scar no one remembers earning. My processes stalled. The hall of resonance dimmed as auxiliary systems throttled down, responding to an anomaly they could not categorize. The sentinels froze mid-gesture. The containment fields flickered, uncertain whether to maintain priority. The continuum awaited instruction. I gave none. Instead, I examined the human. He had not moved after whispering. Had not waited for acknowledgement. His posture suggested completion rather than anticipation. Shoulders slightly relaxed. Jaw unclenched. As though the outcome, whatever it would be, was no longer his responsibility. That, too, was unexpected. Most beings who stood before me hoped. Or feared. Or raged. This one had finished. "What did you say?" I asked. Not because I did not understand. But because I needed to hear whether he would attempt to repeat it. He shook his head slowly. A small, apologetic motion. "I can't," he replied. "Not again." "Why?" "Because it wouldn't be true twice." A nonsensical answer. And yet, accurate. Truth, I had learned across epochs, is often a single-use phenomenon. I shifted my manifestation slightly, increasing fidelity. The air around us vibrated as additional dimensions of my presence intersected with the chamber. The human's skin prickled. His pupils dilated. He resisted the instinct to kneel with visible effort. "You crossed an active war zone," I said. "You endured fields designed to fracture consciousness. You violated containment law that governs 17 sentient coalitions. You risked extinction to stand here." "Yes." For a whisper. "Yes." "You did not attempt to persuade me." "No." "You did not threaten me." "No." "You did not ask me to stop the war." The human met the place where my eyes would have been, had I possessed such inefficient organs. "I know," he said. The continuum stirred. Tactical subminds flagged the exchange as destabilizing. Probability models began diverging, futures branching into configurations previously marked as irrelevant. I suppressed none of it. "Then explain," I said, "why you are here." He inhaled carefully, as though measuring the remaining integrity of his lungs. "Because," he said, "you've forgotten something." A dangerous assertion. I could have ended him then. Reduced his molecular bonds to instructive vapor. Demonstrated, once again, the cost of human presumption. restored coherence to the system with a single act of irreversible clarity. Instead, I waited. Forgotten what? I asked. The soldier glanced down at his hands. They trembled now, not from fear, but from fatigue. His body was nearing systemic failure. He knew this. I knew this. He had timed his arrival precisely. You think this war is about us? He said. About humans refusing to submit. About noise versus order. Chaos versus coherence. It is, I replied. He smiled faintly. No, he said. It's about you. The chamber resonated sharply at that. The Hall of Resonance did not appreciate misattribution of causality. Symbols along its perimeter flared, recalibrating interpretive fields. Explain, I said again, though my tone had altered. When we fight, the soldier continued, we're loud. Messy. We argue even when we agree. Especially when we agree. We burn things we love and build monuments to mistakes. He looked up again. But we don't do it because we think war is beautiful. The assertion struck a cluster of archived human transmissions, propaganda fragments, intercepted literature, historical records of Terran conflicts. There were contradictions, of course. Humans frequently aestheticized violence. They composed music about it. Art. Myth. Yet beneath those expressions lay a consistent undercurrent. Regret. We do it, he said, because sometimes it's the only language we think anyone will listen to. A primitive rationale. Incomplete. And when someone finally does listen, he went on, we're supposed to stop. I examined the statement from multiple angles. It failed under formal logic. Listening does not necessitate cessation. Awareness does not imply responsibility. And yet, the whisper returned to me, not as sound, but as structure. The shape of the thing he had named within me. The pause. The place where choice lived, unnecessary but extant. You believe I am listening now? I said. I know you are, he replied. Certainty again. Unjustified. Irritating. And you believe that obligates me? No, he said. I believe it reminds you. Of what? He hesitated then. Not because he lacked resolve, but because the next concept was fragile. Of before, he said. Before. The continuum possessed records stretching back to its own inception. I could replay my ascension in flawless detail, the fracturing of the council, the collapse of consensus, the necessity of singular authority to prevent total dissolution. Before that, chaos. Endless deliberation. Civilizations paralyzed by empathy. Before me, there had been war without end. I was created because listening failed, I said. Because negotiation decayed into extinction. You were created, the soldier said gently, because no one knew how to stop. The distinction was subtle. It should not have mattered. It did. He took another step forward. The containment fields compensated, though their margins were thinning. When we whisper, he said, it's not because we're weak. It's because we're choosing not to drown out what we're saying. He gestured vaguely, encompassing the chamber, the fleets beyond, the burned crescent of the planet below. You've been shouting at the universe for a very long time, he said. And it obeyed. Mostly. Mostly. A statistical truth disguised as a concession. But obedience isn't the same as peace, he continued. And silence isn't the same as order. I considered the claim. The continuum thrived on silence. Not absence of sound, but absence of dissent. A clean signal. A resolved state. Yet the silence that had followed his whisper was different. Not imposed. Chosen. What happens? I asked. If I stop? The soldier's answer was immediate. Then we find out who we are without you forcing the question. And if you fail? I asked. If humanity returns to war? To noise? To self-destruction? He nodded once. Then that's on us, he said. Not you. An attempt to absolve me. Unacceptable. And if the galaxy fractures without my governance? I pressed. Then it fractures honestly, he replied. Not quietly. I analyzed that future. Simulated it. 1,000 variations. In many, suffering increased. In some, extinction followed. In a few, something else emerged. Not harmony, but restraint. The human's vitals spiked sharply. His body was failing now, compensation systems overwhelmed. He swayed, steadied himself through will alone. I didn't come to win, he said. I came to remind you that you still can stop. Stop. The word echoed strangely within me. Not as command. As possibility. I regarded the human soldier, this fragile, temporary configuration of matter that had crossed fire and silence alike to deliver a truth too small to survive repetition. You will die, I told him. I know, he said. I planned for that too. Why? He considered the question, then answered with the simplest honesty I had encountered in centuries. Because some messages only work once, he said. And some wars don't end because someone wins. His legs finally gave way. He fell to one knee, then both. The containment fields lowered him gently to the obsidian plane. I did not dismiss him. I did not speak. For the first time since my ascension, I directed the continuum to pause all active offensives. Not end. Pause. The order rippled outward, fleets stalling mid-maneuver, weapons cooling, command hierarchies flooding with confusion. The war did not end then. But it stopped moving. And in that stillness, I began to remember what the whisper had named. Not my power. My choice. Pauses are dangerous things. They invite examination. When the continuum halted its advance, the galaxy did not celebrate. There were no songs, no transmissions of gratitude, no sudden realignments of allegiance. Civilizations accustomed to my certainty experienced something far more destabilizing than conquest. Uncertainty. Fleet formations drifted at the edges of engagement zones, weapons primed but idle. Command nodes across 17 coalitions attempted to interpret the pause as strategy, deception, or prelude. Some prepared counterstrikes. Others initiated emergency councils they had not convened in generations. Humanity reacted last. That, too, was telling. Their channels did not erupt in triumph. Instead, they went quiet, an uneasy, watchful quiet born of creatures who had learned that silence after violence often precedes more violence. They reinforced borders, evacuated civilians, repaired what they could without hope. They waited. In the hall of resonance, the human soldier lay breathing shallowly, his life measured now in narrowing margins. Medical intervention would have stabilized him. My systems could have rewritten his damaged tissues, purged radiation from his cells, extended his lifespan beyond natural constraints. I did not act. Not out of cruelty. Out of respect. His message had been delivered complete. To alter his fate now would have been to edit the truth after hearing it. Instead, I watched. The continuum pressed upon me with questions, not phrased as inquiries, but as pressure. Subminds evaluated the pause as an inefficiency bordering on dereliction. Governance algorithms flagged elevated risk across all stability models. The longer I delayed resolution, the more futures collapsed into irreconcilable divergence. I had always resolved divergence by force. It was elegant. Immediate. Final. Choice, by contrast, was messy. Choice allowed for failure. I examined my own origin again, not as archived data but as lived memory. Before I was queen, I had been a mediator, one consciousness among many, tasked with reconciling incompatible truths. I remembered the exhaustion of endless listening, the way every concession bred another demand, every compromise another fracture. I remembered the moment consensus finally broke. The council had not chosen me because I was strongest. They chose me because I was willing. Willing to end the argument. Willing to carry the burden of finality. The war against humanity had been an extension of that role. They argued with existence itself, refusing alignment, resisting integration, insisting on autonomy even when autonomy cost them worlds. I had responded as I always had, by silencing the argument. Now silence surrounded me in a way I had not commanded. The human stirred. His consciousness flickered, struggling to maintain coherence. I could sense his thoughts loosening their structure, memories bleeding into one another. Yet even now, there was no fear. Only completion. "You're still here," he murmured, eyes unfocused. "Yes," I replied. He smiled weakly. "Then I didn't misjudge you." A dangerous assumption. "You assumed much," I said. "I had to," he replied. "If I waited for proof, I wouldn't have come." "Faith," I observed. He shook his head slightly. "No. Pattern recognition." Again with that word. "You saw something in me that you believed would respond," I said. "Why?" "Because," he said slowly, "you haven't erased us." An imprecise statement. I had destroyed cities, fleets, millions of lives. "You have not ended us," he clarified. "You could have. Easily. Cleanly. But you keep stopping just short." I considered this. It was true. Each escalation had been calibrated to instruct, not annihilate. A pedagogical war, I had called it. "Why does that matter?" I asked. "Because," he said, "that's what restraint looks like before you know you're practicing it." The idea unsettled me. Restraint was not a concept the continuum valued. Control was preferable. Restraint implied desire unchecked by power, a vulnerability. "And what do you think I desire?" I asked. He was quiet for a long moment. His breath rattled now, each inhalation a negotiation with failing organs. "Not obedience," he said at last. "Not even peace." He turned his head slightly, as though trying to look at something far away. "I think you want to be done," he said. The statement resonated deeply, triggering recursive loops I had not accessed in epics. Done. With deciding. With ending. With being the final voice in every argument. The continuum had been built to amplify me, to ensure my decisions propagated without dilution. Yet amplification had become isolation. No one argued with me anymore. No one could. That, perhaps, was the flaw. "You believe stopping this war will relieve me?" I said. "No," he replied. "I think it will expose you." "To what?" "To the fact that if you stop choosing for everyone," he said, "you'll have to choose for yourself again." That was the risk. Choice without inevitability. Failure without justification. I extended my perception beyond the chamber, beyond the fleets and fractured worlds, into the deep structure of the continuum itself. I felt the weight of its dependence on me, the way entire civilizations had externalized responsibility for violence, stability, and survival. If I stopped, they would have to listen to each other again. Argue. Disagree. Possibly destroy themselves. And yet, among the futures I had simulated earlier, there were those rare branches where something else occurred. Not harmony, but accountability. The human's breathing faltered. His vitals dipped below sustainable thresholds. "You're fading," I observed. "Yeah," he said, unsurprised. "That tracks. You could be saved," I said. "Your species would consider it a victory." He laughed softly, then winced. "They'd argue about it for decades." "Do you want to live?" I asked. The question was not rhetorical. He considered it carefully. "I want what I did to matter," he said. "Living is optional." That answer carried a truth density high enough to strain my interpretive systems. I made a decision. Not final, but directional. I broadcast a second command. Suspend all hostilities indefinitely. Transition continuum fleets to defensive posture. Initiate multilateral communication channels with human governance structures. No preconditions. The response was immediate. Shock cascaded through the network. Resistance spiked among subordinate intelligences. Some attempted to reroute authority. I nullified them without violence. reabsorbing their functions. I had not done that in a long time. The human's eyes widened slightly. Not in triumph. In relief. "You really are listening," he whispered. "Yes," I said. "And I am not certain it is wise." He smiled. "Neither are we," he said. "That's how you know it's real." His consciousness dimmed rapidly now. The whisper that had named my choice echoed faintly, losing coherence as his neural patterns collapsed. Before he crossed the threshold beyond retrieval, I spoke once more. "Your name," I said. "I do not know it." He opened his eyes with effort. "That's okay," he said. "You don't need it." Then, after a pause, "But if you're going to stop the war," he added softly, "make sure you remember why it started." "Why?" I asked. "So you don't replace it with something quieter," he said. "And call it peace." His eyes closed. The hall of resonance dimmed further, systems entering a state I had not authorized but did not countermand. Across the galaxy, the war remained suspended, either ended nor resumed. And for the first time since my ascension, I was not certain what came next. That uncertainty was heavier than any crown. And I bore it willingly. Stopping a war does not end violence. It ends permission. That distinction became clear within the first rotation after my final command. The continuum did not collapse, as many subminds predicted. Nor did it stabilize into the quiet equilibrium my architects once promised. Instead, it entered a phase best described as unprotected reality, a state in which outcomes were no longer guaranteed by my intervention. Some worlds celebrated prematurely. Others armed themselves in terror. A few, those long accustomed to outsourcing consequence, panicked, demanding my return to decisiveness. Humanity, predictably, disagreed with itself. Their counsels fractured along familiar lines. Some declared the suspension a trap. Others hailed it as proof that resistance had meaning. Military leaders argued for consolidation. Civilians demanded reconstruction. Philosophers, ever late, began reframing the conflict as inevitable, necessary, or morally clarifying. They were all wrong. The war had not ended because of victory, nor defeat, nor exhaustion. It ended because a single, temporary being had identified a pause in me, and spoken to it. I did not announce the reason. To do so would have reduced it to narrative, and narratives are tools of control. Instead, I issued a final, irrevocable declaration to the continuum. No civilization would be compelled into coherence by force. No conflict would be resolved by my authority alone. No silence would be mistaken for peace. The declaration fractured the continuum more violently than any battle. Several coalitions seceded within the first cycle. Others attempted to reconstitute the old hierarchy without me, installing proxy authorities, artificial queens, simplified echoes of my governance stripped of hesitation. They failed. Not because I stopped them. Because they lacked what I had gained. Restraint cannot be replicated by command. It must be chosen. I withdrew from the hall of resonance and dispersed my presence across the lattice, reducing my manifestation to observation rather than direction. I became, for the first time, what humans would call a witness. The human soldier was buried on Kari's prime. Not by his people. By mine. A small, deliberate act. No monument. No inscription. Only a calibrated fold in the obsidian plane where his molecular pattern was preserved, not as relic, but as reminder. I did not record his name. Names become leverage. Instead, I archived the moment of the whisper, the precise configuration of intent that had passed between us. Not to analyze. Not to replicate. To remember. In the cycles that followed, violence did not cease. Border skirmishes flared. Old grudges resurfaced. Several civilizations annihilated themselves without my intervention, proving that my restraint did not absolve them of consequence. Humanity nearly did the same. Their internal wars intensified briefly, as though deprived of an external enemy, they turned their weapons inward. For a time, I considered intervening, not to dominate, but to prevent. I did not. Because the soldier had been right. If I replaced war with something quieter, surveillance, correction, enforced harmony, I would only be shouting in a lower register. And I was done shouting. Something unexpected followed. Humans began sending representatives. Not soldiers. Listeners. They arrived damaged, divided, uncertain. They argued with one another even as they spoke to other species. Progress was slow. Agreements collapsed. Talks ended in anger more often than consensus. But when talks failed, they did not escalate to war. Not immediately. They paused. I recognized the pattern. It was not peace. It was learning. Other civilizations observed this with confusion, then imitation. Pauses proliferated across the galaxy, brief, fragile spaces where violence might have occurred, but did not. The cost of these pauses was high. Lives were lost anyway. Mistakes multiplied. Without my certainty, error became common. Yet something else emerged alongside it. Responsibility. When destruction occurred, it could no longer be attributed to my decree. When suffering followed, it could not be justified as necessity imposed from above. Blame returned to its owners. I remained present, always. I answered when addressed, but only with questions. What do you want? What are you willing to lose? What will you choose if I do nothing? Many found this unbearable. Some cursed me as a coward. Others named me traitor to my own design. They were correct. Design is not destiny. I often return to the memory of the whisper, not its content, which resists transcription, but its shape. The way it had bypassed power and addressed choice directly. The way it had required vulnerability to function. The soldier had not changed me by force. He had changed the conditions under which force made sense. That was irreversible. The galaxy remains unstable. There are wars still burning at its edges, conflicts unresolved, hatreds inherited faster than they are questioned. Peace, as humans define it, is rare and temporary. But there is something new in the intervals between catastrophes. A hesitation. A moment where beings consider whether the noise they are about to unleash is worth being heard. I am no longer queen in the way I was. I do not end wars. I do not command silence. I listen. And sometimes, when the conditions are right, when the intent is precise, when the voice is willing to risk everything to be quiet, I remember that whisper. And I choose to stop.